Mary Ellen coming in. Brian, are you there?
I'm here, Ross. How you doing?
I'm good. Well,
I'm here, Ross, too.
let's give you an intro.
I'm waiting for Brian to make us a drink. Hurry up. Geez, you're like your dad. You're like gonna, light a fire under you, Brian.
You look the part, and I like
the terribly bad. That should get better as the time goes on.
Looking really good. So this is Brian Hoefling, author of several books and a mixologist extraordinaire and a historian of sorts about drinks. And this is one of his books, Distilled Knowledge. Another one just came out, correct?
That's right. I've actually got one coming up in a couple of weeks now.
It's called How to Get Tanked at a Gala, right?
No, that one's coming out next year.
Okay. No.
This is part of your like PR tour for that one.
I suppose this is the kickoff for my PR tour. Well, for both the cocktail seminars and How to Get Tanked at a Gala.
All right.
So I'm already going to be surprised when I actually write that one and publish it.
Well, anyways, Brian's done events for us in the past. They're really entertaining, and his dad is on our board. Ray Hoefling's been on the board for years. A terrific family with a social conscience, and my wife jumped the gun and tried to mix it right. I hope she got it. I'm afraid to try it with the gala ahead, but let her rip, Brian.
Well, we'll find out. Thank you, Ross. Thank you, Mary Ellen. Thanks to Access Sport for having me back. One detail they did not mention is that Access Sport America was actually responsible for my first public cocktail class that I ever taught. It was not just sort of limited to a smaller group of subscribers. This is back in 2013. So hopefully I'm a little bit better and more entertaining than I was back then. But I'm always happy to come back and work with Access Sport. I love the mission, I love the people. And I'm grateful to you because if not for this organization, I also would never have named my business. You asked me who I was with, and I said, well, it'll be more professional to say that I have founded a business than to say I'm just some guy who's going to come and mix cocktails. So that's how the Hertzog Cocktail School got founded. So thank you for that. But now, without further ado, I am just some guy, and I'm going to start mixing cocktails. For tonight, as has been said, we'll be mixing a drink called the Outrigger. This is a recipe that I came up with in recognition of the more than a quarter of a century that Access Sport has now been around, which is phenomenal. A couple of key points that I want to go through before we get into the recipe itself. First, something that I tell all of my students, which now includes everybody on this call, congratulations, welcome to the club, is flavor is not just taste, it is also aroma. These are both hugely important components, and we tend to discount instinctively how much smell plays into what we think of as taste. The tongue picks out 5 distinct tastes that we know of: sweet, sour, salty, savory, and bitter. There may be a couple of others depending on who you ask, but it's a very, very short list. The nose picks out tens of thousands of distinct flavor chemicals and millions of combinations of them, and each of those combinations is individually encoded, right? If you smell pine and citrus and baking spice and camphor all at the same time, you probably don't pick out those 4 things. You just smell nutmeg, which is, a substance that has all 4 of those constituent kinds of scents in it. This is the sort of the whole universe of what we think of as taste beyond those 5: sweet, sour, salty, savory, and bitter, is really heavily driven by smell. So absolutely, whatever you do, do not discount aromatic elements in the cocktails that you're consuming or making, and never sort of, never discount that. It's also a very strong memory trigger, right? This is part of the reason that we associate things so strongly with flavor, is that sensory stimulus goes directly into the regions of our brain that are associated with memory. Do not pass go, do not collect $200, do not get filtered by the thalamus like all of our other senses are. We get the raw data and we remember it. So these are the things that layer into any cocktail. But in particular, when you're trying to design a cocktail, think in these terms. So what did I do? What was my process, right? Access Sport America is an organization that, of course, is here with us in the Boston area, is here in New England, but also has a very strong connection to Hawaii. And that was where I started. What can we come up with that pulls on both of these areas, which incidentally, historically, do actually have a lot of interplay. New England sent a lot of very dour Calvinist missionaries and a lot of very drunken whalers to the Pacific Islands over the course of the 19th century. So there, this interchange goes back a long time. So as I was thinking this through, we have associations with different kinds of ingredients, different spirits. If you wanted to make something that was associated with artists, right? We think of absinthe as a spirit that is associated with creative people, artists, the Belle Epoque in Paris. Similarly, if you wanted to make something that evoked New Orleans, there's a fairly consistent palette of ingredients that show up again and again and again there, things like Benedictine and Peychaud's bitters. So sometimes there are palettes you can draw from that already exist. So let's start there, right? What do these places have in common? Well, rum, for a start, rum is not something that was, that is a traditional original product of the Hawaiian Islands, but it is extraordinarily highly associated with Hawaii at this point. Many, many drinks made with rum are served and consumed there. New England actually was a big rum producing region for centuries and still is to a certain extent, although not as much as it was at the time of the Revolution. So rum, that's where we're starting. I have elected to go with Privateer White Rum, which is a nice local product. But any old white rum that you've got in your house should work just fine. Note that we think of color in spirits as correlating with age. Doesn't really work for rum, usually works for other spirits. A lot of white rum has been aged and then filtered to remove the color. Some of the New England white rums that are made today are actually not aged in oak barrels at all. Either kind should work just fine in this drink. So we've got our touch point, we've got our base spirit that's got something in common with both of these circles that I'm trying to draw from. Let's look at some things that come from each of them more uniquely. So maple syrup comes to mind as a very classic traditional New England product. When you think of New England and liquid ingredients at the very least, if you're not thinking of rum or beer or apple cider, maple syrup, that comes right to the top of the mind. A counterpart to this from Hawaii, I've got here some passion fruit syrup. Passion fruit, or lilikoi, as it might be said in Hawaiian, is actually also not a Hawaiian product originally. It is native to South America, but it has been very, very thoroughly adopted as a child of the Hawaiian Islands, and is sort of in the way that apples are a very strong product for New England, even though they are not from this hemisphere originally. So that is the core. That's the place that I got to thinking about what are some things that we can combine that draw on some of these cultural and culinary elements. We've got a couple of other things in here. We've got some lemon juice. We've got a flamed cinnamon stick, which I'll show you how to do. But those are less for symbolism and more for flavor. So I think without further ado, how about I go ahead and demonstrate making one of them, and then I can talk a little bit more about the sort of underlying principles of the drink if we have time. Does that sound good?
Pretty
Yes,
clever.
perfect.
Pretty clever.
Fantastic. All right. So a couple of tools that you may or may not have at home, just so you know. This right here is a jigger, sort of two metal cones. Whoops, there was some water in that from when I rinsed it out just before this. Opposite sides like so. On the inside, you probably can't see over the Zoom connection, but there are markings indicating various fluid volumes. If you do not have a jigger, anything that can measure fluid volumes on the order of an ounce will work just fine for this. A small measuring cup, set of tablespoon measures, that sort of thing. If you don't have that either, well, any vessel that you can use multiple times will also work. We can reduce this drink to proportions: 6 parts rum, 2 parts lemon juice, 1 part each maple syrup and passion fruit syrup. If you've got a mason jar or something you want to fill up that many times each, go for it, although you might end up with a much larger cocktail than I was necessarily intending.
So the lucky shot glass from South Dakota is okay?
Yes, actually, that would work fine. Although, again, you would end up with, probably a drink 3 to 4 times the size of the one that I'll be demonstrating. But if you have 3 or 4 people around or some time, that's not a problem.
It's a long gala.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I like the way you think. The other tool that I've got here that is important is a cocktail shaker. As you can see, I'm using a tin-on-tin model. There are basically 3 kinds of cocktail shakers that you will see. There's this one. There is one in which one of these 2 vessels is made of glass. And there is one that has 3 pieces, which sits sort of like that. And then there's a little cap on top and an integrated strainer. Now, the little caps tend to get lost very easily, and the glass pieces tend to break. So a lot of restaurants in the modern era have recognized that this is by far the most efficient and the most reliable device for long-term use. Any of them will work for shaking an individual cocktail. And once again, anything that seals to a watertight seal will work. Once again, a mason jar or some other vessel with a screw top. If you can keep liquid from getting out of it and get it nice and secure, you can shake with it. So let's make a drink. I am going to add first a 1/4 ounce. Actually, no, I'm going to add first a 1/2 ounce of lemon juice because my jigger does not measure 1/4 ounces, but it does measure a 1/2 ounce, a 3/4, and a full ounce. So I can be super tricky and measure my 1/4 ounce ingredients that way. So 1/2 ounce of lemon juice goes into the jigger to start, followed by a 1/4 ounce of passion fruit syrup, and then a 1/4 ounce of maple syrup. Note that I am using fresh lemon juice. I very, very strongly recommend using fresh lemon and lime juice anytime you're going to be using lemon or lime in a cocktail. Orange and grapefruit, you can get away with the bottled products. The fresh stuff is better, but the bottled products are fine. Lemon and lime juice, I've never, ever, ever in my life found a bottled product that worked remotely well by comparison with the fresh stuff. It's often way too acidic or just tastes very concentrated, even if it is not from concentrate. So keep that in mind. Certainly, if it's all you've got tonight, don't feel too bad about it because the drink is still going to taste pretty good, but it will taste far better if you make it a second time with fresh lemon juice. So once again, that was 1/2 ounce of lemon juice, 1/4 ounce of maple syrup, 1/4 ounce of lilikoi syrup. If you also note the glottal stop at the end of that, it's not lilikoi, it's lilikoi. There's a 13th character in the Hawaiian alphabet that is often overlooked because it's written as an apostrophe. All right, finally, let's add some rum. This is going to be 1.5 ounces of your preferred white rum. So I'm going to overturn my jigger to the larger side, which is more convenient for measuring that. All right. Now, I thought that I was super, super clever earlier today because I went ahead and pre-crushed some ice with this nifty little ice crushing machine. And by machine, I mean there's sort of a rotating blade in there that you control with a manual crank, and you just keep going until the ice is crushed. And that was a very clever thing that I did in order to give myself some crushed ice to fill my glass with. You do not need to do this or to have done this, but I do think this is a drink that benefits from being kept super, super cold and a little bit of extra dilution once it's in the glass. But what I neglected to do in the process was to get out some full-sized ice for myself to shake with. So pardon me a moment while I grab an ice cube tray. Fortunately, I'm very close to my freezer. So little note on shaking technique. Absolutely always make sure that you have a firm handle on both ends of your shaker. Whether that means, you have one hand on each end or just a very big hand and a strong grip, doesn't matter, just as long as you've got pressure going in both directions. If you do not have this, sometimes the tins can come apart in the middle of a shake and you can see one of them flying across the room, followed by a stream of wasted cocktail. Don't ask me how I know this, but just trust me, it's very messy. In a similar vein, you want to give the shaker a tap on the back there just to make sure you got a nice tight seal. The coldness will help, particularly with the tin-on-tin model. It will help sort of contract the metal and give you a nice tight seal so that you reduce the likelihood of that. I'm going to shake this for 10 seconds or so. Generally, when someone says shake a cocktail, they mean shake it for about 10 to 12 seconds. As long as it's a relatively vigorous shake, it doesn't really matter sort of what direction or style you're using, but I will give you a sense of what I mean by relatively vigorous right now. All right, and right at the end there, when I took my upper hand off and was relying on one hand, I could feel the shaker tin loosening up. So I almost did the very thing that I warned you against. All right, there's two ways of straining a cocktail. One is using a strainer, which I think is often very, very straightforward. There's also this sort of fun bartender trick where you take the two tins and put a little gap just like that in between them, so that you use the tins to hold the ice back as you're pouring the cocktail out. This is also much more convenient as a low-tech solution if you don't happen to have a strainer handy. But we're not done. We're not done. I've got liquid in the glass, but what did I say earlier about aromatic, the importance of aroma in cocktails? Let's add an aromatic garnish, shall we? I've got this fresh stick of cinnamon. Delicious. Now, I'm going to go ahead and light this on fire. I think this is an appropriate time to remind everybody that you should be very, very careful whenever you're playing with fire, which is what we're literally about to do. This should not be, a whole big conflagration, right? We are looking just to sort of burn the end of the cinnamon stick, kind of the way you might with an incense stick. just enough to get it to start smoking, get a little ember in there so that you can continue getting some of the smoke coming out of it. It should not be actively burning when it goes into the glass, and it would be actually, I think, fairly difficult to get it to do that with an ordinary match like so, particularly if you break the match in half when you're trying to strike it. That, in my experience, makes it very, very hard to light things on fire. Let's try that again. There we go. So I'm gonna get a little bit of big flame around. If you've got like a lighter or a candle lighter, actually works very well for this, but I happen to have a bunch of matches, and I find it a little more convenient to do that. So as you can see, we've got a little bit of smoke coming off. I think I'm actually going to light that one more time. And you can see it's sort of toasted around the end there. And in this room right now, as is going to be the case in your house if you're doing this in real time, there is a lovely, lovely combination of smoke and cinnamon in the air. There we go. That's a nice bit of fire. So as you can see, it really doesn't burn all the way, which is one of the reasons that I'm comfortable doing this as a demonstration without necessarily being there in the room with you to make sure that nothing catches on fire. I've just got this nice sort of singed cinnamon stick, and there should be no actively burning embers in there. I'm going to set it in my glass as a garnish. This is a great drink for a straw, just to minimize the likelihood of contact between the burnt end of the stick and your face. But if you do not happen to have one, just sort of be mindful of your glass. So cheers, friends. This is the Outrigger cocktail.
So does that cinnamon help with the aroma you were talking about?
Absolutely. This style of drink broadly gestures in the direction of what we would call tiki, which is a term that has been, I think, very widely used over the years. But originally, what we're talking about is a sort of culinary and cultural movement that came out of California in the 1930s, which used actually mostly a Caribbean flavor palette, and was wedded to Chinese American cuisine and the aesthetics of a sort of imagined version of Polynesia, as seen through the eyes of Californians needing, something, a very strong dose of escapism during the 30s, but who had never actually been there or anywhere near there. The linchpin of all of this, though, was some really, really innovative drink making that allowed that whole kind of hodgepodge to hang together, and was a wholly original creation of people like Don the Beachcomber and Trader Vic, names you might have heard because they had namesake restaurant chains throughout the country in the end. The trick there always was making something that was evocative, that had that tip of the tongue sensation where you're tasting it and thinking, I know what some of that is, but I can't figure out what it is. And there's other stuff in there I can't even place. I have no idea what it is. Often with very simple ingredients. Don the Beachcomber had a cocktail that was a famously secret recipe where the kind of most secret ingredient ended up being a blend of cinnamon simple syrup and grapefruit juice. That's all. These are things that you might be able to make in your kitchen right now, but for 90 years nobody knew what the heck had gone into it until painstaking research by a particular cocktail historian. All of which is to say, they did this very well in a lot of these drinks. They managed to sort of capture a feeling as much as they were able to capture a flavor. And I find that in this particular cocktail, we are able to use some of these ingredients in a similar way. Passion fruit, it's sweet and it's tart and it's floral as well, but it has this kind of ethereal character to it that tastes exactly like what you think of when you think of tropical taste. Maple syrup is perhaps a less complicated flavor to parse, but it's not one you would normally expect to encounter in a drink like this. So it reads as a sort of rich base note. And if you hadn't seen me make it, if you didn't know what the recipe was, you probably wouldn't be able to pick out that it was maple syrup specifically. I would actually invite everybody on this call. Go ahead. Next time you have an occasion to serve it to somebody who isn't here with you tonight, try it. See if they can figure out what's in it. I'll bet you $10 that they can't get half the ingredients. And admittedly, that this was all kind of somewhat deliberate. There is an element of cultural blending here, which I think is this style of drink is very well suited to. There is a multi-layered and kind of rich sense of all of the possibility in the glass. And I felt that that was an appropriate style to commemorate something as magnificent as a quarter of a century of access sport.
Oh. Did you just perfectly time this?
Perhaps if I did, it was entirely by instinct or coincidence. I'm
You
happy
just
that it worked
perfectly
out.
timed this. So we're going to take a 5-minute break before the gala starts. But Brian, that is magnificent. Will that ever make it into one of your books?
It may just have to.
I mean, the time you put into this and to meld the two cultures like that, and to know how deeply ingrained we were into the Hawaiian culture, and then to mix that with the New England culture, just really something. Wow. We got some people chiming in that they love this drink.
Oh, fantastic.
Mary Ellen, do you want to say anything to our mixologist extraordinaire?
I just wanted to know if Brian delivers.
In principle, I make house calls in terms of practice classes. I will do them over Zoom. I have been since the beginning of the pandemic.
You are part of, there is a mixology basket. Do you know that?
Yeah.
So
yes.
you're part of the auction that will go until Friday. So
Does the basket come with a little instruction, Brian, or how does that come together?
Well, gosh, I think that the brochure probably will say it better than I can.
yeah, there's and I think also you should note that you do this. You'll do parties and things like that and events, which is I think this is really entertaining. I love this.
And again, once all of this has gotten hopefully much better over the next few months, I will gladly resume doing these things in person again. I look forward to the first time that I'm able to do one of these, one-on-one, hands-on, or not one-on-one, but in-person, hands-on instruction. As much fun as this is, it's a little bit better fully live.
It's
right?
pretty good. Well, thank you, and
Yay.
I guess Dave, let's go to our timer down to the gala, and we're almost there. Thank you.
Final countdown.